Professor Šabić, thank you very much for joining our interview series.
Thank you for the invitation.
Let me start right away with the first question. How do populist narratives in the Balkans leverage the refugee crisis to deepen divisions and reinforce ethno-nationalism, particularly in relation to the securitization of migration? What role does the portrayal of refugees as cultural or economic threats play in populist movements within the Balkan region? And how does this compare to similar strategies in Western Europe?
I will try to give a short answer to a complex question, but there are three key elements in replying to your question. One is the personal experience of many of Balkan citizens from the 1990s when they were refugees and displaced people due to wars in the former Yugoslavia. So that is one. Many people still have personal reflection and personal experience. The second element is that, yes, you are right. Since the refugee crisis in 2015, we have seen, first it was, I would say, more humanitarian or more solidarity-based response of most countries in the Western Balkans and Southeast Europe, including Croatia, which transformed into more securitized and more border-focused approach to migration, as a result also of the European Union's policy and approach that protects borders, prevents irregular crossings, and has less and less capacity, empathy, and desire to process asylum claims. And then the third element, which is emerging slowly, is a trend of new migrants, immigrants as foreign workers, because all these countries, as many other countries in the European Union or elsewhere in the world, have shortage of workforce. So this is now creating additional social, political, economic challenge for these societies that are not ready for this. Somehow, the change is happening without real policy discussion, and I see that as a problem.
Right. How has the rise of populist leaders in the Balkans influenced policymaking during and after the refugee crisis, especially regarding border security and the treatment of asylum seekers?
Well, as I said, predominantly the governments at the time, with few exceptions, thinking of the governments in the Western Balkans, not to go too much into history, but if we focus on Croatia, for example, Croatia did show this human face of the country in a sense that people were accepted, assisted, and then transferred. You know, the maximum, our notion of humanitarian approach was limited to our ability to assist people and then help them transfer through the country. So all these countries in the Western Balkans are still transit countries. Refugees, except for the migrants that I said, the foreign workers, but refugees in general come and they go through these countries towards wealthier European nations. And in that sense, we still don't have real radical anti-migrant strong political force, but it is gaining momentum for all kinds of reasons, because of the EU securitization policy, because of populist narratives, because of new migrants that are coming legally, but because there is no discussion, there is no education of domestic population or dialogue with them, they see and perceive many of them as a threat. And then the overall, I would say, anti-liberal narrative and discourse that is happening globally.
Right. You argue that the underlying gap between massive formal transfers and shallow or reversible enforcement of the EU rules is particularly evident in the area of rule of law across the Western countries. Can you explain the reasons why this is the case?
You are referring to an article that I wrote with my colleague Rolda Elbasani, where we compared Croatia and Albania, but the main theme, it has been repeated by many different researchers and authors, and we see evidence of it in a series of what one could call new EU member states, although they're now they have quite long membership by now. But I would say that, you know, the transformative power, the notion has been that the EU accession is transforming candidate states, and then once they fulfill the criteria and conditions that are put at them or in front of them, they will reform in a way that they will be fully functional members of the European Union. But, you know, the problems are in these countries with low level of democratic development, many having, you know, post-war transition situation, certainly post-socialist or post-communist transitions, so political transitions, economic transitions, so transfer from collective to market economy, wars, and then the overall changes in the world. These countries still need assistance to democratically develop, while at the same time we have the EU, which is having its own internal problems, in which, despite the pledges, the promise of enlargement is distant still, very still, and in which both sides somehow commit, or they commit publicly, but somehow are reserved or not really structurally and objectively committed to the goal of reform. In a simpler way, many of my colleagues say the EU is pretending that it wants to enlarge, to admit new members, and the candidate countries are pretending that they actually want to reform to join the European Union. So there is this dance of pretense for, again, as I say, for all kinds of reasons, but if we speak in particular of the countries of the Western Balkans, but also for any other potential EU candidate states, the EU as a mechanism to share values and, you know, normative values of peace, dialogue, cooperation, and solidarity, free, all kinds of, I mean, the key four freedoms, is a massive goal that would be very important to sustain for the European Union itself, and I hopefully we will be able to, and then also to incorporate new members that are going to make this European Union stronger rather than weaker.
Right. What has Brexit's impact been on the Europeanization of Croatia's foreign and defense policies and possible advancement or undermining of its Europeanization process?
Limited. The fun fact, let's say, is that actually when Croatia joined the European Union in 2013, already, you know, the pre-campaigning for Brexit has already begun, and, you know, very soon there was a referendum a few years later, and then again a few years later, the United Kingdom officially left the European Union. So for Euro enthusiasts in Croatia, it was hurtful because we are joining a union, and this was the key political goal since the country became independent, an organization from which a prominent member is departing. But in many other aspects, bilaterally, Croatia and the UK were not that entangled. So it didn't significantly diminish or decrease European desire, I would say.
Right. How have elite and public Euroscepticism in Croatia evolved towards key EU policies, such as Eurozone membership, enlargement, common security and defense, and the rule of law? And how do populist parties and rhetoric leverage narratives of national identity, sovereignty, and economic or cultural anxieties to shape public opinion and resistance to deeper European integration, both domestically and in comparison with other Balkan countries?
I think this question is a pro futuro one, and we will see whether we will have stronger Eurosceptic political parties. We did have in 2016, for example, a short period of 6 months when we had a different parliamentary makeup. We did have more rightist or even far-right, populist, Eurosceptic, not anti-European, but Eurosceptic parties, but this was short-lived. So we still have all our key political parties are committed to the European Union membership. All our key political figures, so the president and the prime minister of the government, are pro-EU and pro-NATO. And despite some, political differences in political ideology or political preferences and, the political fight that is logical among different players in the political arena, there are not that many differences. It will be interesting to see if changes occur due to the nature or the reality that the European Union will face, or more broadly in terms of transatlantic relations. But so far, not to invest too much time into topic of Euroscepticism in Croatia, it is not significant political force, but it doesn't mean that it may not become one in the future.
Right. How does the rise of conservative ideologies and nationalist rhetoric in Croatia reflect broader populist trends, and what role does EU membership play in either amplifying or mitigating these tendencies?
I would say, as in any other EU member state and even candidate countries, every society is a plural society, and we have seen trends of polarization in many societies. Croatia is not the exception, but look at Germany, France, the results of the American elections, and elsewhere in Europe and in the world. Polarization is not novelty here. So when you say European, how does the EU membership feeds these forces? Yes, it feeds liberal thought, but it also feeds conservative thought, because both are present very strongly in the European Union. So in that sense, both liberals and centrists and conservatives and right-wing people, they have their interlocutors elsewhere in EU member states and in the European Parliament, of course.
How has the interaction between populist rhetoric and Euroscepticism in Croatia impacted its role as an advocate for EU enlargement in the Western Balkans?
Well, Croatia is is in a minority in the European Union that is advocating for further enlargement, because all the member states and their citizens generally are against it. Actually, the UK was an exception compared to some other richer EU member states. And for the enlargement, Brexit was a loss. However, the issue that I see with Croatian support, so Croatia is especially a keen supporter of the Western Balkan, or enlargement of six Western Balkan countries. The issue that I think Croatia should engage more and I'm trying to find a good word in a way, like how it's one thing to say we want the EU to expand or to enlarge. But if we know that the problem with one of key problems with enlargement is the issue of internal decision-making process in the European Union, one would want to see countries that, for example, want to see the EU admit new members, that they are willing to discuss rules or maybe changing of the rules for decision-making in the European Union. Because if we agree on, for example, qualified majority voting, and that eases fears of inefficiency and blockades by using veto powers of member states, of some member states, then we could make a discussion about enlargement more constructive. Croatia is still very silent on this topic, and I think we will need to engage more substantially in this discussion, because if we want to defend or realize some interests, we have to acknowledge interests of other members, and this is still lacking.
Right. What are the key factors driving the rise of populist movements in Croatia, and how do these factors differ from those in Western Europe?
You know, it's populist, when you say populist movements, this is very, it's a broad term. And definitions may differ. But if I'm thinking of political parties that express at least some of the similarities that we have seen elsewhere, we did have conservative ideology, obviously very strong impact of Catholic Church in terms of respecting or protecting the values or norms and culture, traditional society, traditional values, the family, and so on, the language. And then we have additional elements, as I said, anti-migrant narrative is still not that prominent. It is happening and it is developing, but it hasn't been the core, the essence of this, of the populist ideology until now. But one additional element that may not be that present elsewhere is the relationship, again, the reference to the wars that we had in this part of Europe at the end of the 20th century. There are still many unresolved issues with neighboring countries, and this is very much driving the populist narrative for those citizens that very strongly emotionally feel these issues.
Right. To what extent do populist leaders in the Balkans utilize nationalism and historical narratives to consolidate their power, and how does this impact regional stability?
Well, this is just to confirm and or maybe continue on your previous question. Exactly. You know, ethnic hatred or ethnic distrust among different nations, or exclusive nationalism as ideology, they fueled issues that were contested in the former Yugoslavia and then led to these violent wars. And we still have issues and challenges and you know, unresolved problems 3 decades ago that are burdening our current reality. So our societies will still have to go through a phase, and I hope we will take that path, and that there won't be a new conflict, big conflict in Europe or in our region, but a path in which we will face the past, in which we will be able to invest in dialogue with the enemy, in which we will be able to reconcile or you know, make peace with our neighbors, because this is the only, and within our societies, because this is the only path forward. We can continue to insist on our own truth and insist on our own right, but we will always be closed societies if we don't make an effort to establish channels of communication, then hopefully understanding and dialogue with someone with whom we disagree. The whole idea of the European Union was created because we decided that we don't want wars as an instrument of resolving our open issues. And I really do hope that the Balkans will that societies will mature enough one day to take such path.
Right. How have external actors such as the European Union, Russia, and China influenced the trajectory of populist politics in Balkan countries?
Well, the EU we mentioned, because the reflection, the communication, and the sharing of political ideologies within the European Union with different parties or political families, they have their counterparts in this region. And then some of these correspond very nicely with political ideology and the worldview that is coming from China and Russia. They are not necessarily all in the same basket, but there are overlaps. I don't know how detailed you want me to go into Balkan politics, but let's say that certainly as elsewhere in Europe, in the European Union, in the Balkans, in Croatia, there are overlaps or some similarities, or at least some sort of sympathy or understanding for different positions with respect to the mainstream European politics. Let's put it that way.
How have Croatian far-right parties employed populist strategies to address economic grievances, such as rising cost of living and inflation? And how effective has this been in broadening their appeal beyond traditional national spaces?
Not successfully, not because this is not an issue, but strangely, for many countries, Croatia is actually going through a phase of quite lavish financial situation due to the European funds. In this financial framework, Croatia has been able to gain quite substantial support from the European Union, and salaries have increased, and public spending has increased in terms of also reconstruction and different other projects. Inflation is a problem, but again, so far this key financial or economic element has not yet emerged in Croatia, which does mean that certainly it won't, especially when the funding from the EU is reduced. So this is something to watch out, because of we have all the other elements of negative economic perspective in terms of demographic decline, of the aging of the population, the deindustrialization, and the large reliance on tourism as one of key industries. And in climate change and in very volatile geopolitical or circumstances, this is a very sensitive industry. So there are many things to watch out.
Right. Zoran Milanović achieved the highest electoral score for a presidential candidate since Croatia's independence in 1991. What factors contributed to this remarkable success during his second term?
Several. I think he did appeal broadly to Croatian citizens, quite broadly. He does come from a social democratic political background, but he also has his own personal political character that he brings to the public, and has a very specific way of communicating with people. This is something that majority, obviously, of Croatian citizens respect and accept. And there is also a notion that, president is popularly, by Croatian constitution, president gets to be popularly elected, and but doesn't have much power, which lies mostly with the government, because Croatia is a parliamentary democracy. But Zoran Milanović tried to, he didn't win in the parliamentary elections, which he also tried, which tells you something, that citizens chose him and see him overwhelmingly as a president in a role that he has right now, also as a corrector and some sort of balance of checks and balances in the system, in that sense, his victory is really unquestionable in terms of legitimacy, but specifically, as I say, in the role that he plays as given by the constitution of Croatia.
Right. Milanović is often accused of being a pro-Russian puppet who undermines Croatia's credibility within NATO and EU, with leaders like Viktor Orban in Hungary, Robert Fico in Slovakia. How significant is Milanovic's potential influence in weakening the EU's pro-Ukraine stance?
I always wait to see more evidence that Milanović is a pro-Russian player. I mean, he did say things that have that could have led to such conclusion, and especially in the context of discussion about Ukraine, NATO's engagement in Ukraine, and then NATO's enlargement when we discussed Swedish and Finnish, or Sweden and Finland's NATO membership. And he linked it to the issue of Bosnia-Herzegovina and so on. But I haven't seen evidence in reality that he could steer Croatian politics away from the European Union strongly, that we change our foreign policy course. And many of the mutual suspicions and accusations are also a result of domestic political discussion and debate, rather than really a reflection of the country changing its orientation, foreign policy orientation.
All right. And lastly, with Donald Trump beginning his second term as US president, how might Milanović and other populist leaders in the region be impacted by Trump's renewed leadership?
I don't think Milanović is, if we are discussing the rest of the region, he is in the same camp, because Croatia is a member of the European Union, and we do have still this collective umbrella, which largely decides our transatlantic relationship with the United States. But some other leaders in the Balkans are very much hopeful. Some are very much fearful what the new Trump administration will do, because the United States has been, until now, for the last 30 plus years, a key force or key power in stabilizing this region. If that changes, if the United States cease to be the anchor of stability in this region, then we will wake up in a different future.
Okay.
I really hope this doesn't happen, and that peace is held in the Balkans.
All right. Professor Šabić, thank you very much for your time. I appreciate it.
Thank you very much for inviting me.